I've often heard that our role in learning development is to make learning easy. What if that isn't the case? What if the opposite was true and that good learning should be hard? Well, today we've invited Julia Phelan, a learning engineer who has done a fair amount of research on this very subject. She discusses the challenges of learning, creating safe spaces for people to make mistakes, and how we can better partner with leadership to ensure that we provide the right kind of support for learning in this new workplace of ours. It's a super fascinating subject full of tons of information. So buckle up, folks. This ride is going to be fun.
They are the fabulous learning nerds. Cause if you're tired of the old ways of getting it done, you've got the fabulous learning nerds. Scott and Dan are making it lots of fun. The best ideas that you've ever heard. So everybody spread the word. They're gonna keep your wheels turning. The fabulous learning nerds. Fabulous learning nerds. Oh yeah!
Hey everybody, welcome once again to another exciting episode of the Fabulous Learning Nerds. I'm your host, Coach Shooty, and with us tonight, you love him, Dan Coonrod.
Dan the man. Oh yeah.
Mr. Coonrod,
Hey, Scott.
you're not going to ask me how I'm doing, are you?
No, I've learned my lesson.
How are you doing, sir?
Well, sir, I think you could probably say I'm pretty good. I'm doing all right. Like things are good. I got you.
So you're not...
Fair to Midland.
No, I'm always fair to Midland. I can't lie to you.
Yes, we're still looking for input, folks. Like if you know exactly what Dan the man means by fair to Midland, please email us at learningnerdscast@gmail.com. And once we get your emails, we'll be sure to read them on the air. And that'll be a glorious thing. We should probably have a fair to Midland convention. What do you think? Like a gathering of sorts.
Oh, man, I don't know. That'd be tough. That'd be super tough. I think it'd be good. I think it'd be good. I take that back. I'm going to retract that, and I'm going to say I think it would be good.
Okay.
That was a journey.
All right. Well, let's see what our other co-host would think about something like that. Miss Abby Dawson, everybody. Abby!
Hey Scott.
Fair to Midland Fest. Yes or no?
You know, I think it'd be a lot of fun, and the best part would be watching Dan go through those journeys all through the experience.
You know how he kind of starts and stops, like he goes, and his journey would start with, "I think that's awesome."
Every time.
Every
It's
time.
true story. True
Yeah.
story.
I think that's awesome. Let me
And I
ask you this.
I
Go
have
ahead,
news,
Abby.
Scott.
Oh, what's your news?
I have my Halloween costume. I thought you'd
Oh,
be pretty excited.
Oh,
all right. What is your Halloween costume?
Well, you want to talk about going on journeys. My son is 3.5. He wanted me to be a witch. I cannot express to you how difficult it is to find a witch costume for a woman that is neither too not appropriate for kids, like too bar ready, or scary. So I had to do some I had to get some creativity built in, but I think it's going to be good.
Awesome. Oh man. I'm feeling it. Oh, I can't wait. That sounds scary. Ooh, scary kids. Something that's not scary, folks. No, that's a deep cut. Count Floyd, SCTV. Look it up. Ooh. At any rate, something that's not scary is our guest, and I'm super excited to introduce to you Miss Julia Phelan from 211, and we're going to get to know Julia with a little segment we call "What's Your Deal?"
Hey man, what's your deal?
Julia,
Hello, good morning.
what's your
evening.
deal, my friend?
What's my deal? Well, I am the co-founder of my learning engineering company, 211, which we named. We were inspired by, it goes to 11 from the Spinal Tap. We wanted to go, above and beyond. So we were thinking about, how can we really evoke that? And so we came up with, whatever we're doing, we're going to 11 because 10 isn't quite good enough for us.
Can I pause you there?
Yes.
Couldn't you just make 10 louder?
No, but these go to 11.
Perfect.
Exactly.
That was
Exactly.
perfect. Woo! All right. Thank you, Julia. Julia and I are best friends now. Continue.
We are best friends. And so, about 4 years ago, I decided with my co-founder to start the company. I'd been doing educational research at UCLA for about 20-ish years, and I just wanted to, branch out on my own. So now we do all kinds of different stuff. We're a sort of a innovative kind of education consultancy firm. We do, studies with people. We help people develop training. We help audit and review people's training and learning experiences. We help publishing companies create new and cool, evidence-based learning environments and experiences and all kinds of different stuff. My deal is that I want to help people teach things better and I want to help people learn things better. That's my deal.
Love it. That is awesome. And again, the name of your company is incredible, and I love it. I think it's totally awesome. And this week, Julia is going to be chatting with us on this whole idea of good learning is hard, which I think is so great. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into our topic of the week, shall we?
Are you ready?
So Julia,
Yeah.
I love your topic. Learning should be hard. I think it's great. And I think that a lot of us in instructional design have been brought up the opposite, right? Where let's make this as easy for people to get as humanly possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're right. Like, good learning needs to be hard. So help us understand this idea of learning being difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, like you say, sometimes we get, we live in an environment where we're watching videos on YouTube and other places, and we see people doing stuff. We see people, teaching us things or whatever it might be, and it looks so easy, right? And I spend all this time watching these people doing like those little art videos, on like Facebook or places, and you watch someone do something, and you're like, wow, yeah, like you watch it and you think, yeah, that looks really easy. And I think it kind of lulls us into this sort of false sense of thinking that, learning anything or getting to be good at anything requires like a whole lot of like time and practice and, feedback and all of that. And so I think that when we don't really understand that or embrace that, it can lead you, not to be even motivated to even start something, but I think it also can lead you to sort of give up too easily, right? If you think like, okay, well, clearly I can't do this. Clearly that I'm not that type of person, or I'm not a math person, or I'm not a whatever. And I think that when you can build a more realistic model, like mental model of sort of what learning really is, and really understand that, for anyone to gain expertise, it's taken them years and years and years and years of practice, that you can, it starts to feel a little bit more doable and manageable, but also I think you're just motivated more to even start and persist and put in that effort if you really can sort of realize that, yeah, okay, this is hard, but it's going to be worth it, right? I'm going to learn something cool, or I'm going to learn a new skill.
What are some of the things that we want to think about then from a learning and design perspective when it comes to challenging our audience to make it hard?
Well, so I mean, one of the things, let's think about, students studying, for example, right? So when you study as you're in college or in a class, whatever you're doing, because most of us haven't ever had anyone tell us like, hey, here are some of the most effective or efficient ways to study and learn things, right? I mean, I certainly never had that when I was in school. Anyone telling me, okay, these are some good strategies or some good techniques, or this is what's going to work better. And maybe some lucky listeners did have that, but I think it's not that common. And so when you don't have something like that, what is easy to do is fall into these sort of habits of studying in ways that feel good, right? And feel easy, right? So maybe let's say you're playing the piano, and you're practicing a piece and there's a part that you know really well, right? And so you're practicing that. It feels good, right? You're like playing the piano, you know this bit, it feels really good. You're like, yeah, I've got this. And then you get to a difficult bit and it's like, that doesn't feel so good, right? Okay, now I can't do this bit, right? And so then what our tendency is then just to stop, right? Okay, I'm just going to stop there because, all right, but I was really good at this other part, so I'm actually going to go back and I'm going to play that other part again, right? And so you kind of go this far and then you get here and it's like, yeah, that's just too hard, right? And I think if we can shift that mindset to be like, okay, I don't worry so much about the part that you already know, right? Let's really focus on the part that you don't know. And if you pick up a paper and you're studying for a test and you're just kind of highlighting stuff or rereading stuff, again, you get this sort of familiarity. You've got sort of a fluency. You recognize what you're reading. You're like, okay, I got it. Yeah. But a better way to do that, right, would be to say, okay, if you know that your test is going to require you to, I don't know, write an essay about something. Okay, so flip over your paper and write an essay about something, right? Do it. Like, do the thing that you will be doing on the test, as much as you know what that will be. And only then are you confronted with, oh, wow, I really thought that I knew this, when I was like staring at my paper because I had this recognition. But as soon as I flip it over and I'm telling myself, okay, write an essay, pull some stuff out of your head, that's just much, much harder. And what it really helps us to understand is, wow, I really thought that I knew that, but actually I really don't, and having that information then as a student, right, can help you say, okay, I thought I knew that. I didn't know that. I need to practice this a bit more. I need to go back to the well and do a little bit more studying. But you don't want that to happen, that realization, on your test day, right? Or on the day when you're actually doing something. So it's, I think, helping people to recognize and get a bit more knowledge about what some of these strategies that will actually work, and then giving people ways that they can actually do them, right? So if we're telling people, hey, it's a good idea to quiz yourself or something, as you're studying, well then helping people figure out, where are some good sets of questions that I can use to study, in that way, or things like that. But I think we have to both understand the strategies, but also understand why they work. And again, then going back to our learning is hard idea, that if I can understand that, okay, this is going to be hard, I need to actually, flip over my paper and write down or practice to do what I'm supposed to be doing, then, I think it's just a bit that much more motivating, and it's that much less demoralizing thinking, oh, I don't know this, right? You're actually kind of moving forward.
I am so fascinated by all of this. I'm a big believer in allowing people to fail during training. I think it's incredibly effective. I've run into a lot of challenges when I've pitched, especially to sales teams and folks who come to us with training and say, I need it and I need it fast. I need them to learn it fast. I have so many questions, but I'm going to try and be focused. My biggest questions are around how do we set those good expectations with our partners about what training will look like, how it will be different, that there will be times where it looks like maybe nothing's happening, but we're allowing people to struggle, maybe even fail. What's the difference between struggling and failing? And how do we show folks, and I know this is a lot, I'm asking like 3 questions all at once, but how do we show folks that the training is not bad? It's just allowing things to be hard. And talk us through kinds of those pieces. And I know I asked a ton, so I apologize. That was bad question asking, but I'm just super excited.
So I think one of the questions was about building in some more failure and struggle and that sort of thing, right? And I think that when I think about the idea of struggling, I think that sometimes, there are some schools of thought that would say, okay, it's almost like a sink or swim, like, okay, here, just kind of toss you in and you'll figure it out and it'll be sort of just you're in survival mode or something, right? Well, I think that is less of a productive type situation with a novice, right? If you have a novice person in any training or learning situation, that you need to have, some foundational understanding of whatever it is that you're learning in order to kind of move you to the next step, right? So I think just really thinking about, okay, brand new person, novice trainee coming in, what is it that I need to kind of help to sort of set the stage, give them some foundation. And it might be, and if you're teaching them how to solve a problem, right, you just have them solve just the first step of the problem, right? Like they're not solving the whole problem, because what tends to happen is if you, and again, it could be any type of problem that they're trying to solve, but if you have people say, okay, you're brand new, I'm just going to have you try and solve this problem, then what tends to happen is that they'll kind of like brute force their way through it. Some people might be able to solve the problem, some people might not. But ultimately, even if they did succeed, they don't necessarily know, well, what is it that made me succeed, right? Like, how did I even get there? It's kind of like when you are trying to solve a problem, in your computer or something, and something's screwed up, and you're kind of doing a bunch of stuff, and maybe you solved the problem, but you don't really know how you solved it, right? So you can't repeat that. Like, it's just like, I just kind of got lucky. I pushed the right sequence of buttons, but, what does that
You're
really
describing all of my tech approach.
Yep. Well, those are my approaches as well. But then you didn't learn anything from that, right? Because you can't repeat that. And so I think that's what happens when we put novice learners in that type of environment and say, hey, just kind of go for it, struggle along, because they don't really get to understand, oh, I see, I did this, that led me to this, that led me to this, right? And so I think when we build in opportunities for people to fail, it's just important that there's another built-in component to that, which is a support and feedback, right? And so it's, okay, let's work on this problem, whatever it might be. All I want you to do is solve the first thing or do the first step or something like that, right? And then, okay, now let's give you some feedback. Let's give you a model of what this is actually supposed to look like, right? And so then you can see, oh, okay, here's a fully worked out example or a problem being solved in some way. And all I had to do is do this first step, and then you can kind of build up to that, right? But I think that normalizing failure or normalizing those types of struggles, as long as they are coupled with, feedback that is addressing, okay, what did you do right? What did you do wrong? How can you move forward towards whatever your goal is? And I think the other thing that really undergirds all of this, and oftentimes is missing in training experiences, is a true, measurable goal, right? That sometimes it's just like, okay, we know we have to do something, maybe we've thought about it, maybe we haven't thought that much about it, and off we go, rather than thinking, okay, our goal and in this one day of this training, let's say, or this 1 week is X. And then how can we unpack that and figure out, okay, well, what is it that we're going to need to do to get people to that particular goal? And let's figure out that, like, what are the steps look like? Because as experts, we tend to forget all of those steps that take you to developing expertise in anything, and that's a risk, because then we can sort of overlook. And again, going back to learning is hard, if we forget all of the time and energy and effort and all the little sort of micro steps it took us to build expertise, then when we're trying to teach somebody something, it's easy to get frustrated, right? And think, well, how come they didn't get it yet? Like, I know how to do this. Like, how come this idiot doesn't know? And so I don't know whether that addressed any of your questions.
Yes. Yeah, it definitely did. I love the idea of making sure that you've mapped out that process to getting to a goal and clarifying your goal.
Yeah,
it's easy to not do those pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, sometimes it's, oftentimes you think, oh, I have this super cool activity, or I have this thing that I want to try, I get people get really engaged when we do this thing, right? And so, yes, there's definitely room to do things that are just purely to keep people engaged and motivated. But sometimes, you end up with, oh, these are all my favorite activities, but they're not really, serving my bigger goal, right, of whatever I want people to learn. So again, I think it's just, sometimes you just have to be sort of strict with yourself, right, and think, well, am I really, is what I'm teaching really, aligned to what I want them to learn? And also with the understanding that, we have a limited amount of capacity in our brain, right, to learn new stuff. And so, in any one day or any one training session, you can't go to a 4-hour training session and expect people to come out of that having learned every single thing that you want them to learn. So you have to be really intentional about, okay, I've got X amount of time, what are the key things that I want to help people to understand and get? And maybe we're going to build on it in a subsequent session, right? But there are certain things that will be better offloaded to a book or a manual or a website or some other forum. But while I, the teacher, am with the student, what's the best use of that time, right? What's the value added of having me here versus just giving you a pamphlet? Okay, and really thinking intentionally about that.
That's awesome. That's you guys were talking about like making safe spaces for failure, and I was at a talk. This is a long time ago, and somebody was talking about basically brains are just like predictive engines, and they don't really engage until what they've predicted doesn't happen. What we call mistakes are those things that like trigger like those neural pathways to start like, oh crap, I got to remember this. Something went wrong, and now I have to remember this so I can better predict it next time. And it goes with so many things. I can't tell you. I've actually given somebody the feedback one time, like, hey, your job this week is to go and make a mistake. And they looked at me terrified. Like I had like I was like, you're fired, or had said something like terrible. And I'm like, no, really, go break something. It won't be that big of a deal. It won't be so bad. And it'll be good for you to go and make those mistakes. And then we're going to go make some more mistakes. And then we're going to keep making mistakes until we get it right. And I love that.
I love that too. And I think that when you do that too, you start to see, right? Because sometimes you think, well, wow, if I make a mistake, it feels like it could, it's going to be the end of the world, right? That's it. Like I make a mistake, I'll never recover. And when you make a mistake, figure out what went wrong, like you said, learn from that and move on, maybe make another one next week or the next day. But you start to see like, oh, okay, I thought that was, the end of the world, but it actually wasn't, right? And I was actually able to kind of move past that. And then it starts to be less daunting, right, to make a mistake, because you have some experience with, okay, yeah, I made a mistake, things didn't work out, but actually, I moved forward and it was okay.
Yeah.
It's really interesting too, because I think a lot of leaders will talk, hey, it's okay to make mistakes. We're going to learn from them and we're going to move forward with that. As educators, though, I find it incredibly challenging, and Abby, you kind of alluded to this as well, that creating a safe space for people to learn, yeah, we get that. Making it challenging, yeah, we get that. Creating a learning with failure built in, ooh, really scary. Like, oh wow, what do you mean by that? Like, I have a workshop next week and I'm super excited about, we built a curveball in there with the intent that we're going to talk about it and learn from it. And I'm a learning nerd, so I'm just like bouncing off the wall, super excited. Like, these are things that I know are intentionally correct or directionally correct, so to speak. I mean, we rarely get the opportunity to do that. Could you talk to us a little bit about how we can begin to be thinking about, or some of the things from a design perspective and from a facilitationist perspective, where that can be more applicable in the things that we produce? Does that question make sense?
I think so. So you're asking about building in some of those opportunities. Is that what you're?
Oh yeah, being intentional around our failure, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a few different ways to do that, right? Because I think in one case you can. I'll give you an example from my husband that just came up recently. So he is a professor at UCLA and teaches big classes. And during the pandemic, obviously everything's online, and he talks a lot in his teaching about how he wasn't a particularly good student when he was an undergrad. And he went to UCLA as for his undergraduate degree. And when he was even subject to dismissal at one point because he had been getting such bad grades, just because he was too busy, running around doing other things and having fun. Right? But he pulled himself together, kind of turned things around, and ended up going to some awesome schools and getting his PhD in biology and things like that. But in that moment, when he was an undergrad, he really was like on the sort of precipice of being kicked out. And he tells people these stories about this. And during the pandemic, so he's on the Zoom, and so now he's got this environment where students who maybe wouldn't normally raise their hand or wouldn't normally volunteer something have this little chat window, right, that they can type something into. So talking about safe space that Dan was just talking about. It's just a private message to the professor. No one else can see it. And a student wrote to him and said, I really appreciate you sharing this story and being vulnerable, right? And that it makes me feel that I'm not alone, and that anything that all these terrible things that I've been feeling that are happening to me, this student, that I can move past them, and that my life isn't over, because I got an F in physics or something, right? And it seems like a small thing, him just telling these stories, but I think that those types of things can be really impactful when you actually have these real examples of, and you're not just saying like, okay, everyone, it's easy, it's fine to make mistakes, and just saying that, but actually giving a concrete example of something that actually happened, either to you or somebody else, and then, okay, what was happening at the time? What did you do to kind of fix that? And then what was the outcome of that? How did you move forward from that? And it can, I just think, help people see that these things aren't insurmountable, but you don't want it to be just a sort of Hallmark card of like, okay, failure is okay or something, because it doesn't feel that real, right?
I'm just going to say right now, best Hallmark card ever.
Yes, I'm clearly not going to be a greeting card designer with
Julia, you are right, because it feels disingenuous, right? Until you actually get the proof of the pudding. So the proof in the pudding, in my perspective, just like in your husband's case, is let me share with you an example that I went through. Or, hey, we all went through this. Let's talk about it. What did you learn? How did that make you feel? What could we do to do better? One of the things that I find challenging in almost every organization that I've had the pleasure to serve is this idea that postmortems, where we really do take a look at what we did well and what we could do better, are things we talk about but don't actually do very often. And I'm ready to pull my hair out. Like again, the learning nerd in me is like, I want to learn. Like, how do we get better? We're never going to get better until we talk about it. Like, we're never going to get better until we throw our ego out of the room and we talk about it. So yes, creating a safe space is important. But I love your example around, hey, let's talk about not just my experience, but what we experienced together with the intent of safely growing and getting better, which is what ultimately I think all of us really want to do.
Absolutely. Right. And you talk about a business case like that, like, okay, we had a project that let's do a post-mortem on that. Like, what happened? What did we do well? What did we not do well? And you can think about the same thing with students. Let's say they take a test or something, right? That how many students actually then go back and think, okay, let's look at this test. Let's figure out, okay, all of the questions that were about this, I didn't get right, or all of the questions that were this format, I didn't get right, or something like that, right? And then you can start to think, okay, next time, I better focus a little bit more on those pieces, right? Or this type of question is clearly challenging to me. I think it works in all contexts, right? That we have to think about, what sort of, how can we treat everything like a formative assessment sort of situation, right? And it could be anything, but the key thing is we're looking at the information, the data that we're getting back, or whatever the finding or the result, and we are thinking about how does that deviate from what we expected, right? And then what can we do to close that gap in the future? And you could apply that to any situation, I think.
Julia, I love that idea of like types of questions that you failed at, and going back to your earlier mention of just in general, that process of like students needing like a safe place to say, I didn't feel like I could do it, or I felt like I struggled here. I found out pretty early in elementary school that I was dyslexic and that I struggled to learn in the way that everyone else in my class struggled to learn with. So where I learned to use failure was to say, I'm not going to be able to learn it the way you're teaching it, and to get comfortable approaching my teachers in that way. How as we as facilitators help people recognize, our students recognize, I need to say I didn't get it, and I don't think it's because I think I need it introduced differently. And then how do we meet those needs?
I mean, I think that's one of those sort of $1 million questions, right? Because I think at the end of the day, it would be awesome if everybody had their own personal tutor sitting on their shoulder, right? And so I think that given that we don't have that and we can't have that we just need to think really carefully about different supports and scaffolds that we can give people, right? And again, I think when we think about let's say you're dyslexic or something, that thinking about, okay, well, how can we, what are just different modifications we need to give to you, the student, or somebody else, to help support you, and it may be it's just extra practice, or it's practice in a different kind of environment, or it's a different medium that you're giving people practice in. But what you don't want to have happen is that becomes the reason then that you're not learning something, right? So you don't want that to happen, and it's just difficult. I think that things like we think about adaptive learning systems, things that are truly adaptive, right? And lots of people use the term adaptive in a way that isn't really real, but when we think about a truly adaptive situation, that can be helpful in lots of cases, because we can allow people to kind of be working towards a goal of any kind, but they're doing so sort of in their own time, right? Or so some students, if they're doing really well and they've just got whatever we're teaching them, they'll kind of move through an adaptive system really quickly. While other students, if they're not quite there yet, they'll just be engaging in that thing for a longer period of time, and all of that is helping them learn stuff, right? But so it's just they're going to get to the same point, we hope, but it just might take them a little bit longer. But building in opportunities that might be sort of outside of the traditional class time, can be helpful in that way. But I think differentiating education is just it's a huge challenge, particularly when you've got a lot of students that you're working with all at once, right? So it's, again, just trying to think about ways that you could give students choices and things, again, when you're staying true to your goal. But it might be, okay, I want you to create a synthesis of all the topics we've been learning about in the last week, and I want you to make either a video, or I want you to make a slide presentation, or I want you to give a talk, or make a little web recording, or whatever it might be, that you give people a choice of sort of how they want to present that. That's one way that you can help people to, again, sort of, it taps into their interests, but it also might help support students that you're talking about too.
I love that. And Scott, doesn't it remind you of Doc Kim talking about his comic book lessons where he would let them create anything? I love that.
Yeah. We need to get him back, but I totally agree. Like allowing that personal connection with your own learning journey in a way that maybe suits the syllabus or curricula in any certain way, I think is really, really important. Mm-hmm. And all too often, I think we kind of fail at that, and it's not our fault, right? We're so focused on the finish line of, I got, done is good, right? So we're going to go ahead and get this done, right? And love you, Miss Loudon. Done is good. But at any rate, it's that. How do we make it personal? How do we tell our own personal stories, right? Before the show, Dan and I were talking about this idea of hook statements, and I want to encourage my facilitator to come up with those on their own, because they're so much more personal. I could give you one. Here you go. Use this, but it just feels disingenuous. But that's an aside. One of the things I loved, you are a self-proclaimed learning engineer. Could you talk to us a little bit about that and some of the learning science that you wield to make this world a little better place, and how it kind of circles back to what we're talking about today?
Absolutely. Yes, I think when we think about teaching and learning, there are all sorts of different things that we know about it. There's research in motivation and memory and all kinds of other sort of psychological principles that we can sort of pull from, and all of that is the sort of learning science piece of it, right? And I think about it like this: that let's say you're a designer or an engineer or a physicist. Let's say you're a physicist, and you're in a room in a school, and you're designing a bridge, right? And so all these physical principles that you need to that you need to employ to design this bridge. So you've got a sketch or a model that maybe you've built in your nice tidy lab, and that's the sort of learning scientist kind of component that you've thought about all these different physical principles. And then now an engineer now has to go out into the real universe and build this bridge. And now there's a whole pile of constraints right around that. So it's like, oh, now I'm building this bridge. It's near water. It's this temperature, or there's this amount of wind that comes through here all the time. And so now you have all these other sort of contextual factors that you have to take into consideration. So understanding those principles is one thing, like these physical scientific principles, but now the engineer has to consider all this other stuff as well as that to actually build and execute this bridge. And so I think when we think about learning, it's the same thing. We can have this nice understanding of cognition and motivation and making learning meaningful, but then we have to pick it up and move it out of the lab environment, as it were, and put it into the real world. And now think about, okay, now what are all the things that I need to be thinking about to make this learning experience good and effective? And so, Dan was talking about, psychological safety. And so, I need to think about, okay, well, what type of students do I have here? What else is going on? Are there any distractions that are happening? And so all these different kind of things that are like the weather and all these different contextual factors. So I sort of think about it, and this sort of harkens back to the 211, that I think about it like a sound mixing board, one of those giant things that you probably have one, like that you're moving things up and down. And so I think about it that you've got these different levers, and so you can build an amazing learning experience, let's say, or a class, or write an amazing book, or whatever it might be. But now when you pick up that thing and put it into the real universe, now you have to think about, okay, do I need to nudge up my teacher presence in this environment? Or do I need to increase my focus on helping students get a sense of belonging, because maybe I've noticed that that's a thing that I'm lacking? Or do I need to try and focus on extraneous cognitive load, because that's something that I noticed that's happening here? And so it's kind of, you're like nudging these things up and down. So that's, I think, the engineering component of it. And so it's just really thinking about, there's no, when someone says to me like, oh, what's the best way to teach someone XYZ? Well, it just depends, right? It depends. Everyone is starting from a different place. Everyone has different prior knowledge, different degrees of self-efficacy, different emotions that are in their brains at that time, different dynamics in their home life, or a million things, right? So there's no best way to do anything. You just have to consider the context that you're in. And so that's really the engineering piece of that.
Can I steal all that, put it on my LinkedIn? I love that.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I really do. Really do love that, because I feel like so many people in the learning and development field get this feeling that they're somehow not professionals, or somehow not doing a science. And so just to talk deep about the science of learning, talk deep about being like, hey, I'm a learning engineer, I'm an experienced engineer. I love that. I love that approach. I love that thought. And I think it's something that our industry really, really needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it validates the time we ask to give to people, to give to learners, to give to the subjects. It's really an important discussion. I agree.
Yeah. And I think it's just so, and I think I'd mentioned this to Scott previously, that it's I feel like sometimes we put so much emphasis on subject area expertise, if I could just use that term, and then we don't put as much emphasis on teaching and learning expertise, right? And so why would it be that we don't expect someone to roll out of bed a great chemist? Why do we expect someone to roll out of bed and be a great teacher or a great learner, right? And so I think that if we can elevate that to the same level as other things that we give more sort of cred to, right? That then we're going to be in a better place, because I think we do a disservice sometimes to the whole profession of teaching and learning by not really sort of recognizing it as its own skill in and of itself.
Talk about that intersection between teaching and learning and the workplace. I think we're in a revolutionary period for teaching and learning, especially when it comes to the workplace. And it's the Wild West, if I could use that analogy, right? Like, no one's figured this out yet, but we're all going to go on this journey together. And I know you have some really deep, important thoughts about that. So if you could share that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something I've just been thinking a lot more about recently in a more sort of purposeful way, that all of the things that I'll give a training workshop on, let's say, helping create a sense of belonging. We'll just use that. There are all these ways that in a sort of traditional educational environment, one can do that. And we could start with the syllabus and making sure that you don't turn people off with your syllabus, and it's something that a lot of educators haven't really ever thought about, but that's a really important component. And so in thinking about that, I just started to think a lot more about, okay, so now you're a new employee at a new company. Let's say you're doing your onboarding training or something. Well, it's the same thing, right? You're learning something. You're in a new environment. You perhaps don't feel a great sense of belonging yet, on your first day. And so there are lessons that we can learn, right, from what we know about teaching in a more traditional context to something like that. It's the same thing. We're just a new person coming into a new environment. We don't know anything about it. And there's stuff that we need to learn, right? And so we can build in some of those same things that we think about in a more traditional context into that workplace. Or thinking about, I think a lot about this idea of, extraneous and intrinsic cognitive load, right? We have only so much room in our brain, and we want there to be some cognitive load, but that's the stuff that really is relating to what we are supposed to be doing. So again, in a workplace context, you can't give someone 15,000 things all on the first day and expect them to take much away from any of that, right? But in thinking about how can you figure out a sort of an onboarding or program at the beginning of a new job that sort of divides things up into manageable chunks, giving people chances to have a little win, and that, and sort of again it speaks to the motivation and all of those things. So anything that we think about in the sort of traditional learning context, I think is applicable to the workplace. The idea of I've been thinking about recently about this you have people who get promoted into new jobs, and maybe they've worked really well, they've moved up, they've got up, they get promoted to a new job, and now all of a sudden they're supervising people, right? Or they're a manager of someone. So maybe they were really awesome at their job, which got them this promotion, but then do we just expect them to be good at supervising people, or good at managing people, or good at dealing with that? Why? Like, why would we expect that? But sometimes, we don't pay as much attention to that and give people training and support. So, this guy's been at the company for X number of years, right? He's excelled and been promoted, but we forget that all of that experience doesn't necessarily mean that that person is going to be a good leader or a good supervisor or a good manager, whatever. And so we need to be thinking, I think, a little bit more intentionally about supporting that, because that, again, is a skill in and of itself, right? To supervise and lead and manage others. And there are a whole bunch of things that you need to learn there, but I think sometimes we sort of overlook that.
Too many Michael Scotts out there managing people. It's a Office reference if you didn't get that. Yep. And by the way, I think the great learning in Michael Scott is that over time, I think he got it, right? So over time, I think he got it. And his heart was definitely in the right place, but he did not have the competency for leadership. And you're so right. Like, I talk about this all the time, like the Peter principle, this idea that most leaders have been promoted well above their competency is a very real thing. And part of that is that we don't identify what are the key behaviors that we expect leaders to have. And do you have those skill sets, those talents, right? And then do we go out and reinforce it, right? And so, I love it. Could talk all day about that, but I certainly don't want to take up any too much more of your time. As we begin to kind of wind some things down, what are some things that you wanted to talk about, Julia, that we didn't have time for, and or some really key ideas that you want to make sure our audience gets from this very awesome conversation?
That if we go back to the beginning and think about, how learning is hard but worth it, right? I think that to me is one of the most important things that we can really try and internalize, that okay, if we have a better understanding of how it works. So I spend a lot of time helping people think through, okay, well, what is learning? What do we need to do to really learn things, to really have learned something? How do we make learning more meaningful? We have to be, any kind of real learning is going to be effortful, right? So I'll often do these little exercises, just like almost like little psychology class, little games and things, and just to try and help people to see that, oh yeah, if you visualize something, a pair of words or something, then you're more likely to remember them than if you didn't do that, or and just even just simple things like that help people to see, if I process information in a deeper, more meaningful way, if I connect it to that I already know, all these types of things, if I start to make, comparisons, and drawing analogies and all this type of stuff, that is all that's going to do is help sort of solidify everything, and it's moving whatever you're learning from your working memory to your long-term memory. And I think that, if we can really get people to understand, so that it's like, looking under the hood, right? Like, and to figuring out like what is happening when I'm learning something, what is going to get what has the potential to get in the way. So you just kind of go in there with your eyes open, right? That okay, I know that this is going to be tough, so I need to remove all the distractions, or I know that I can only learn this much in this amount of time, or whatever it is. But just, I think when you have this realistic view and this realistic perspective, it allows you to just enter into it with a different mindset, that I'm not expecting to become an expert in anything in half an hour or one day or whatever it might be. And I think just even internalizing that is so important.
No, I love it. I want to read your book. I want to take a class.
Yeah. Sign me up. 100%.
Well, awesome. Yeah, I do. I mean, I do all these workshops all the time, so I'll have to send you guys some info, and next time I'm doing one.
We'd love that.
So, Julia, thank you so much. I've loved this discussion. I'm going to be thinking about a lot of what you have to say for the rest of the day, which is a great thing. Could you do us a favor? Let our listeners know how they can get more of you. How can they connect with you, Julia?
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And I think the best way to connect or learn more about me and my work is probably on LinkedIn. And I also have a website, which is 211, but the number, like 11, TO11, and then solutions.com. And yeah, both of those are great ways to get a hold of me.
Well, fantastic. Again, I appreciate you coming and sharing the knowledge. I think it's really, really important. Daniel.
Yes, Scott.
Could you do me a solid and let our audience know how they could participate with us?
Nope, I'm not going to do it. No, I'm just kidding. Of course I can. Hey, everybody. If you haven't already, hit us up, learningnerdscast@gmail.com. Email us any questions you may have. Join in the discussion. If you haven't already, we would love to know what your plans for Halloween are. It's fast approaching, and we're super excited. If you're on Facebook, you can find us at Learning Nerds. Like us, participate in the conversation, do all that fun, groovy stuff. Lastly, for all you folks on Instagram, you can find us Fab Learning Nerds. Share any cool pictures you might have, any cool stories. Also, Halloween pictures. We're very interested. Scott?
I'm so excited that this podcast has morphed into a Halloween podcast. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
I mean, everything I do eventually morphs into a Halloween theme.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, it's going to be about it for this episode. I want to thank Julia Phelan for sharing the knowledge around learning, engineering, and all the things that we can do to be better at our world. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, share this episode with your friends. If you're following us on, say, iTunes or Stitcher, we'd love to get a review. Let us know how well we're doing. Let us know where there are opportunities where we can do better. It helps us get our name out there, and it helps us improve what we do. And with that, I'm Scott.
I'm Dan.
I'm Abby.
I'm Julia.
And we're your fabulous learning nerds, and we are out.